I wanted to talk to you just a little bit. The sermon's already been preached. That was the 12 Days of Christmas, which surely you'll never forget, especially with our minister of music. And by the way, there's a search now going on for a new minister of music after today. He doesn't know that yet, so, no, I'd get fired if I did that. So Christopher stays. I really enjoyed that this morning. And it's just fascinating to watch how you can turn almost anything into a lesson to teach kids. And kids are geared to know that they're supposed to learn about Jesus at the church. It made me think today as I saw all the folks here around Pastor Doug, and he was reading them the story that I heard about. There was a church where they were doing the children's sermon, and so the children's pastor said, "And now, little girls and boys, what is that thing that's green that sits on a lily pad and goes rivet, rivet, rivet?" And some kid raised his hand and said, "I know the answer is Jesus, but it sounds just like a frog." And so you're always, geared to know the right answers in church. And so kids grow up kind of knowing the right answers, which is a part of things. In the second chapter of the book of Luke is where we get most of our information about the early days of Jesus. If you think about it, we have very, very little information about the Lord's childhood and his adolescence. And so there's all kind of fanciful tales told about the Lord, and has been since the beginning. But the fact is, we simply don't know. That wasn't included in the gospel record. And Luke was written by someone that was a second-generation Christian. He didn't know Jesus, and he had never met him. He came into faith after the church was already up and running, and so he learned all that he learned from other Christians. But he tells us in the first chapter of the book of Luke, Luke says, "I went around and I asked eyewitnesses who had been with Jesus what he did and what he taught." And so I have collected these stories together in this, this presentation that I'm making in this book to the man that he's writing, a man by the name of Theophilus. Now, when we get to the second chapter of Luke, we begin to get information about the Lord's birth and his childhood, all in one chapter. And the fascinating thing is, historians believe that this information probably came from Mary, because there's a long tradition of Luke having gone to Mary, spent time with her, getting this information down. And if you'll think about it, this is consistent with the way moms talk. I don't know how many of you had the experience of going to a family reunion and all of a sudden your parents start telling these old stories about you, and they keep getting embellished as the years go on. You notice that? It's like the first time you fell from an embankment that, 3 feet, and then it becomes 6 feet, and then it's like, come from a second-story building, and all. This is the way moms talk, and this child, glowed in the dark when it was born, and it was unbelievable this child could do so many things. Or on the other hand, he was such almost, I thought the kid was possessed, into this and into that and into the other. And our parents seem to embellish it, and they think that they're not. But, this seems consistent as Mary begins to tell Luke about the things that she had experienced before the Lord's birth, after his birth. And so we get in the second chapter, we get the story of the Lord's birth for several verses. And then it transitions into the Lord's dedication in the temple, because all Jewish boys were taken to the temple for their circumcision on the 8th day. And we have stories about around that, about there was prophecy about Jesus as he goes to the temple. And then it moves in about verse 41 in Luke chapter 2. It moves into telling us about something that happened when the Lord was 12 years old. Now, this follows a pattern of older Christian groups to where you have the christening. After a child is born, and then there's a christening where the child is baptized and given the Christian name and gets godparents and all of that. And then the child is brought up in faith, and at 12 years or so, the child then is confirmed. And that was growing out of this Jewish pattern to where the child would be presented to the Lord after birth, and then there would be this time of teaching and training, and then at 12 years old, the bar mitzvah. And this was the Lord's bar mitzvah that's recorded in Luke chapter 2. And Mary is telling it and said, he got away from us, and when we found him, he was confounding all of the doctors of the law. He just had them right there. They couldn't believe this child knew so much, and they were just stunned. And then one of the gospel writers comments, this was to be fulfilled what the prophet said, the Lord whom you shall seek shall suddenly be found in his temple, even the messenger of the covenant whom you delight in. And I memorized that listening to Handel's Messiah, and that's a part of it. And I wanted to remember to tell you just a little story about that in just a moment. At any rate, what she is telling us is in this pattern of the Lord's growing up days, that something happened between the time that he was presented to the Lord in the temple and the time that he comes to his bar mitzvah. And what that was, what had happened during those years was his training and teaching in the things of God. So by the time that Jesus came to the temple, he could say to the rabbis and the priests in the temple, he could tell them all that he had learned. He knew the 10 Commandments. He knew the prophecies of Isaiah. He knew all the Psalms. Most of the Jewish children memorized all the Psalms. They used these every day. How did they know all this stuff? Well, they knew it because the Lord told the ancient people of Israel that they were to teach their children when their children got up in the morning, when they went to bed at night. They were to write things over their doorposts. They were to put stuff up on their walls. They were to have certain ceremonies through the years. And all of these things were formed as a way of bringing up the children, the next generations, in the things of God, so that each generation would have the content of the faith generation after generation after generation after generation. Now, this is one of the things we most admire about the Jewish people, that they do this so well. But Christians have done this as well, and only recently have we not been as intentional as past generations in making sure that our children know the structures of the faith. A few years ago, it hadn't been that long ago, just a few weeks ago, I watched a documentary that I believe you can get on Netflix about when the Hasidim, the Eastern European Jews, after the Second World War, came into New York, and how they settled here. And this, of course, after very traumatic events. And so to what the reporter was asking, one of the rabbis is, gosh, we go through New York today and we see all these people with these curls and their hats and their distinctive clothing, and they are still retaining all these traditional ways from long time ago. And these folks are successful bankers and business people of all kinds, and they're into commerce and chemistry and all sorts of things, win all kinds of Nobel Prizes and so forth. What has made this community be able to thrive in this country and yet retain the distinctives of who they are? And the rabbi said, when we came to the United States, we observed things, and we were observing that Christians and Jews that had been living in this country had built large temples. They had built large church buildings, and they had built large synagogues, and they had not invested very much in children's education. And we decided to do the opposite. Our rabbis, many have been bivocational. They worked a job. But we didn't build elaborate synagogues. We built very simple synagogues, and we invested our money into schools and the training of children. And as a result, our children have grown up in the faith, and they believe they're Jews. They believe what Judaism teaches. They didn't secularize. And this is, of course, consistent with what the Scripture has taught us to do. And I often say that the training of a child is the most important thing a church does, because Someone told me a few years ago, yeah, you say that, that's a romantic thing to say, but the fact is that children don't pay any money, so it's not the most important thing we do. But you know, that's a really cynical way of looking at it, because I look at it that adults, if they get disgruntled with a church, they just go to another church. It's kind of like the guy you've heard most people have now, the joke about the guy that's gets rescued after being on a deserted island for many years, and he gets on the boat and he's just looking longingly back at this place where he's lived many years, and there's 3 structures there. And the captain says, what are these 3 structures? And he said, well, that was my house. I built that house there, and I lived in there. He said, well, that makes sense. Well, what's the other 2 things? And he said, well, the second one's a house of worship. On the Lord's Day, I would go there and worship the Lord. And he said, what's the other one? He said, oh, it's a church I used to go to. So we adults do that. We get disgruntled, we move around. It's just the way we play musical churches sometimes. But our faith is still there. And even if we get so discouraged we're not even like going to church, and this happens unfortunately to people. It shouldn't, but it does. The adults are going to die in the faith, most of them. But the children and the young people, that's where the vulnerability is. And teaching them is so important, and that brings me to a conclusion here. I want us to use this season to teach our children the ways of God. Now, every year, from the time I can recall, and I remember my dad getting these letters, people will send me letters, sometimes big epistles, emails about how pagan Christmas is. You're wasting your breath on me. I'm unredemptive in this way. You're not going to be able to win me over. It's impossible. I love Christmas too much, and I can't be talked out of it. That's just the way it is. And it's not pagan. It grows out of Hanukkah. Early Christians were Jews. I guess everybody knows that. And so early Christians celebrated Hanukkah. And I've got to tell you about the origins of Hanukkah so you will know why it's important to teach children. Well, the story of Hanukkah is contained in the book of Maccabees, which is between the Old and the New Testament in a collection of books called the Apocrypha. Your great-grandmother had one. If you've got an old family Bible somewhere and you open it up, there'll be an Apocrypha. Very expensive to print all of this. And since Protestants don't regard it as Scripture, though we honor it and respect it and gives us our history in between the Old and the New Testament, 400-year span, it was easier to leave out. And finally, people stopped reading it altogether somewhere in early mid-1800s or so. Wasn't read too much in Protestant circles. But there's a lot of good information there, including the most magnificent story from the book of the Maccabees, and here's what happened. The Syrians had conquered Israel, and they were in control everywhere. And they even defiled the temple. They come into the temple, and they offered a pig on the altar, and all kinds of bad things going on like that for Jews. Jews were very angry and upset, and so there was an uprising. And the family's name was the Hasmonean family, but history called them the Maccabees, meaning hammer, because they hammered away until their country was free of foreign oppression. And there's some great stories about guys going under elephants. They brought the elephants in. That's ancient tanks. And they're coming in with the elephants. And all the guys rush out under the elephants and stick the elephants with a spear. And I don't know how they cleaned all that up later, but that's another story. But one of the things that happened was that the temple couldn't get supplies in. And there was no oil to light the menorahs. And so the people kept lighting them anyway, and for 8 days without any oil, they burned miraculously. And of course, the Jews, seeing this as God's hands and God delivering their country, began to celebrate a feast that's not in the Old Testament, but it's in the New Testament. It's called the Feast of Dedication in the New Testament. Jesus celebrated it, and it's what we know as Hanukkah, or the Feast of Lights, if you will. And so the reason that Jewish people created these feast days, and God had prescribed them to do this, is so they could remember. And on these occasions you teach. Passover, for example. In the Passover ceremony, from which we get our communion service, almost entire communion service comes from the Passover. The oldest says to the youngest, or the youngest says to the oldest, "Why is this night unlike any other night?" And the youngest says, "Because this was the night that the Lord brought us out from Egypt with a mighty hand." Why on this day do we do such and such and we don't do other things? Because this was the night when God said, surely you shall, eat in haste because it's the Lord's Passover, and you shall depart from Egypt in haste, and so forth. And so there's this questions and answers from which we get the structures of catechism, of teaching people the faith. And this happened in Judaism. Jesus had gone through all of this. He was well prepared. He knew what he was about when he was 12 years old. Why did we do the 12 days of Christmas today? Well, because kids can remember that for the rest of their life when they hear the 12 days of Christmas. And some of us that never heard this story before, when we hear it, we're like, yeah, and we'll laugh and we'll remember this teaching moment when Pastor Doug presented to us the 12 days of Christmas as a teaching tool. Because your brain is structured in such a way that new information has to have some place to go. And so he gave it some place to go. People have been doing this for a long time. And that's why the Lord says, take this time to teach your children. So, every year I get out the nativity set, and I've done this now for years, and my little grandkids would come, 3 and 4 years old, and they knew where the donkey had to be here because it's where he was last year, and then the sheep is over here, and sheep go back, and the donkey, what's a donkey do? And then, I haven't seen a donkey, and then we got to go see a donkey, and then there's like, this is his mommy, her name is Mary, and this is Joseph, and they tell that story in their own kind of way, and they get it mixed up. Has everybody noticed that? Like the kid in the Sunday school class that says, where's round John Virgin? When they put it up into the nativity set, they wanted to see round John Virgin, and so that's getting a little messed up. But we've been doing this along, and we always do it crudely, and none of us are really good at it. I was raised in a little church in the first part of my life before we moved to South America. We'd go down in the basement in the church. That's where everybody ought to go for Sunday school. Pipes are running overhead, and it smells like a little bit of mildew in there. And this is the way God ordained it, I think, because that's what I remember where I learned things. And there was a primitive kind of video system called a flannelgraph. Anybody remember those? And then they get stick figures, and they stick onto the velvet, right? And the reason I remembered is because they only had a few of these. There's a big box, and they would say, today, little children, we're talking about John the Baptist. And put John the Baptist up there. This is John the Baptist. And I would say, well, it was Elijah just a few weeks ago. And the teacher would say, you go out, go see your mom and dad, which meant I was in trouble. What'd I say? And these, in southern West Virginia, it was like, you kids shut up and sit down. I'm trying to teach you about the Prince of Peace here, and get all exasperated. And then we'd learn songs. Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he, climbed up in the sycamore tree, for the Lord he wanted to see. And you remember those all your life. And however sophisticated we may think we get, our training almost always, you can trace it all back to there. Even the most complicated lessons we think we know all go back to those moments. So, enjoy the holidays. Worship. Come here on Christmas Eve and celebrate with us that night. Enjoy all the services and the choir concert. Enjoy it as a religious holiday. But don't get mad at the heathen for celebrating too. And they don't know who Jesus is, so it's okay for them to celebrate the way they celebrate it. Well, sometimes it's not, but, it's okay that, I started to say the Easter Bunny. I got him out of the wrong season here. But the Santa Claus and Jack Frost and all that kind of stuff, it's just fine. Nothing's wrong with that. It's not the Christian way of celebrating, but it's not anything contrary either. And children have a blast with this. And just take each moment to teach along. And all the things that's presented on TV, talk about it. Like the Lord says, when they get up, when they go to bed, and particularly when they're little, when they've got all those questions, answer their questions. They're fascinated by it. Use this season. That's what it's for. All the lights, all the candles, all the ceremony, all the songs, all the hustle and bustle. And even as people are buying and selling, don't get aggravated at that. A lot of businesses stay in business because on this last month of the year, they finally make enough money to make a profit and keep people in making a living so they can feed their families. It's a good time of the year. Enjoy it. Be thankful. And above all, teach it to your children. We're going to dismiss here in just a moment. And before we do, promise I've made to this congregation is that we always have prayer for the sick or any need you may have. And so we're going to take just a moment to give you opportunity. If the altar workers will come and stand here before we're dismissed, we invite you to come for a moment of prayer.
As the altars are open, would you sing with me that carol we sang at the beginning of the service? O come, Emmanuel. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel that mourns in lowly exile here, until the Son of God appears. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Oh, come thou day spring, come and cheer our spirits by thine advent here. Disperse the gloomy clouds of night, and death's dark shadows put to flight. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Oh, come thou wisdom from on high, and order all things far and nigh. To us the path of knowledge show, and cause us in our ways to go. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Would you stand as we sing that last verse together? Oh, come, desire of nations bind, in one the hearts of all mankind. Bid thou our sad division cease, and be thyself our King of peace. Rejoice,
Well, I want to dismiss with one more carol, and we'll just sing together. This will be the benediction, and it goes like this. Angels we have heard on high, sweetly singing o'er the plain, and the mountains in reply, echoing their joyous strain. Gloria in excelsis Deo. God bless you. Go in peace. Have a wonderful Christmas season.